Hello again. It's the second part of the Top 6 show. I've still got John Gibbons and Phil Blundell here with me. And now you guys will be used to us talking about a Manchester team in the second show. We'll also be used to a Manchester team being 22 points behind Liverpool. But hey, this time it's Man City. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've heard quite a lot about Man City turning corners. I've heard quite a lot about how they were going to spend lots of money in January and it was going to propel them back up the table, about how getting rid of old man Walker would make them a little bit more stable, about how Phil Foden and Kevin De Bruyne will show that class is permanent and they will get their form back and they will suddenly be a great football team. Well, guess what? They lied. None of that is true. January 19th was the last time they went 3 games without losing one. And that's a long time ago.
Wow.
So, my first question, Phil, are you enjoying this as much as I am?
It's good fun, isn't it? I'm enjoying it. I mean, the problem is they've got the corner might actually just be a roundabout.
Yeah.
Does feel like that is the problem they've got. They've done some all right things in January, but it feels like their biggest problem, I think, is that they need to iron a lot of things out and rebuild, and they have no summer. They have no summer this summer. Their summer is basically going to America to play in a tournament and then getting 3 weeks off and starting the season. Like, that's when are they ironing out their things? When are they sort of ironing out new patterns of play? When are they fixing the glaring deficiencies that they have in midfield where teams are basically just able to run through them? Yeah, it's Manchester City in name only, really, isn't it? And there's a lot of players. It does remind me a little bit of us sort of 3 years ago. 3 years ago? 2 years ago? 2 years ago. 2 years ago. 3 years ago, we were going for all 4 trophies. Yeah. But it reminds a bit of us sort of 2 years ago, whereby it's a bit like the manager's backed a lot of the players probably a little bit longer than he should have done.
Mm-hmm.
And the likes of like bringing Gundogan back feels mad. Bernardo Silva, whilst still able to contribute a lot, isn't at that level. I don't think in terms of he's got the energy, but I don't think he's ever been the player that should have been the main one. He's always wanted to be there, I think, with a De Bruyne and able to add to that and able to go, look, I'm really good, but I'm getting the opportunity because they're trying to shut him down. And now when they're trying to shut him down, it's not quite as straightforward. There's just a few things like that where they feel like they've got quite a lot to do and it's quite enjoyable, isn't it?
Love it. Now, I hold my hands up and say I thought Gundogan coming back was a really good idea, but that's because he looked decent when he was playing for Barcelona. But I don't know, sometimes when you go away on holiday for a little bit, and then you come back to work and it's all a bit of a head scramble and they didn't really know what they were doing. But Man City fans, I mean, there's not any of them watching this, but they will tell you that injuries have been a big part of the problem. Obviously, everyone talks about Rodri, that being the main linchpin, that everything fell around. But the interesting thing for me is the defence of injuries and the fact that they've so often in this season had multiple centre-halves out injured at the same time. At the moment, it's Stones, Aki and Akanji all out injured. Now, they've still got Ruben Diaz who can play centre-half, Vardiol, they've brought in Kusanov, they've got Vitor Rice who's still, I think he's played 24 senior games in his entire career, which is nuts.
Wouldn't be looking for anyone who's as cold as a rice then.
I love it. But then the problem is that if you say, okay, well, we play Guardiola as a centre-half, he's the one who's been playing it internationally for the last 4 or 5 years, but then who's your fullbacks?
Well, you lose a massive goal for it,
Yeah.
which is what you're getting from him being able to push up.
And I mean, in terms of squad building, like Phil was saying, they've got so much to do. Like, I looked through the Man City squad just now. They've got one fullback, one guy who's recognised, who grew up as a fullback and plays fullback, and that's Rico Lewis. Like, how have they got into this situation?
I think it's lack of succession planning, and I think it's been interesting. You know, people talk about the money that they spend, but about how few players that they've signed over, you know, the last sort of 3 or 4 years, really, in terms of numbers, and they've gone big a couple of times, obviously. But I think, you know, they've got really good young players, I think. But you know, there's only so much you can sort of do with them, and then they've got these older players who've been fantastic for them, but are sort of coming to the end and looking like the legs are going, and you know, in Kyle Walker's case, he sort of moved on. Kevin De Bruyne's likely to sort of move on, you know, in the summer, really, and so they haven't got those players of the right age who are looking to who've been able to step up and take up the mantle. You know, it's looking crazy that they let Alvarez go because he's having such a fantastic season, and it didn't make loads of sense to me last summer, but it makes even less now. And listen, you don't know the pressure they've got internally, you know, and what's been going on behind the scenes. But I always thought that at the time looked a surprising one because of his versatility and because of his quality and because he looked like he was going into his peak years, and we haven't got any of that really. Foden's obviously been a massive disappointment. You expecting a much bigger season from him, and so he's been disappointed. And so I think the manager's been maybe a little bit unlucky there because he probably thinks, well, I expected more from him. I expected more from Grealish. That we've got, I think, Doku they'd have thought maybe would have kicked on, and so there's players who you at a good age you'd expected bigger seasons from, but so often they put teams up on the pitch this season, and you thought, is that it? Do you know what I mean? Like, is this sort of really Man City? And so it's not like it's just big names who aren't performing. It's quite often guys who, they've had to rely on week after week who'd be like a good squad option, but suddenly they're starting regularly for Man City.
It's felt like for maybe 2-3 years now that they're sort of looking at the idea that Guardiola's going to leave, but not being quite committed to doing any level of succession planning or allowing him to put his eggs in a short-term basket. And it sort of feels like that's married perfectly in a really bad manner for them this year.
No, it's a strange one, isn't it? And, I mean, you mentioned Alvarez there, John. I think you could make an argument.
Definitely a level of succession plan.
You could argue, though, he may have been the only one that's been actively replaced with Omar Marmoush, who looks like...
6 months, though, didn't it?
Yeah, it did take him 6 months. But it looks like, of all the players they've brought in, he's the only one who's kind of hit the ground running. And interestingly, the one thing that they never really figured out with Alvarez, but it seemed to with Marmoush, is how he plays with Haaland, rather than him just having to wait for Haaland to get injured or have scored a hat-trick and then get trotting off after 65 minutes to get his minutes. So that part maybe looks like it's solvable. And so within this whole season ending where there are so many teams fighting for those last 2 Champions League spots, I think we already decided the Forest are taking the third. So there's two up for grabs. Can they just score their way to it? And dare I say it, is watching Manchester City about to get a lot more interesting?
I think there's a real chance they drop out. We're going to go on to talk about Newcastle, and Newcastle are a dangerous side. Feeling a lot better about life than Manchester City are at the moment. They've got sort of good availability, no European football, and so just they're at the FA Cup as well, aren't they? And so like their full focus for the rest of the season, once they've got this parade that's not a parade out the way, is
we're going to come on to that.
Is going to be sort of this, and so I think if Manchester City think they can just drift into the Champions League, I think they might be in for a bit of a shock, which will be rather lovely.
Especially when you look at the fixtures as well. They've got it's not fun. Like, all right, there's Leicester at home, which is just give them the 3 points, but United away, United look a little bit resurgent. They'll be up for it because it's a derby. They'll want to win. Palace at home, I wouldn't really want to be interested in that. Everton away could be pain. Villa at home, Wolves at home, Southampton away. Then the last 2 games are Bournemouth at home and Fulham away. Now, there's a world where those 2 teams are dying for points.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a world where it falls to pieces there. Like,
there's a world
where they go on a run as well, but it falls.
I mean, there's a world where Bournemouth knocked them out of the FA Cup this weekend. Yeah. And then
I think it'd be great for the FA Cup if they did, incidentally, because you're then going to get 4 semi-finalists, pretty much whoever it is, where it's like, this is massive, and I think that's.
We look at the last time any of them have won it. Some of them.
Yeah, exactly. Like the FA Cup in this country hasn't really had that in the way that other countries' cups have had last year. It's like go and look at the German and the French Cup finals the last sort of 10, 15 years, and not only who's won them, but who's been in the final.
Yeah.
The French Cup, there's 4th division teams in the FA Cup final, and like on a regular basis, it's very odd.
Yeah, and I think when you consider the quality and the depth that there is in the middle ranked tiers of the Premier League, it has been shocking that it's taken this long to get to this. So I think we need to all embrace it. I mean, I'm going to be watching the FA Cup this weekend, and obviously would I prefer if Liverpool were in it? That's an existential question. Anyway, let's move on to talk about Newcastle since we brought Liverpool into it. So they won the thing, and deservedly so. They showed their best in the final. They showed their best at Wembley for possibly the first time ever. And they deserved all the accolades. Every single man jack of that team is going to be heroes. They're going to be doing reunion tours in 20, 30 years. We're all going to be sick of them. And you know what? Fair play to them. However, does anyone else think it's really weird, bordering on suicidal, that they're doing this parade in the middle of the season?
No, think it's fair.
Why?
Because they've won a trophy. They've got no game this weekend. It's a big thing for them, and you've almost got to strike while the iron's hot doing it. For example, they could get to May, and it could be that 3 of the players who won it are leaving, and that again, that doesn't look like they.
But does that matter though? Because they
think
get
it does.
so long.
It does. I think it does. I think you just have to let them get it done. Let them do it, and it's.
But do you not think that there's a large chance that this might drift some of the focus away from the tasks that they still need to do for the rest of the season, like getting into the Champions League?
I think it'd make more sense to do it at the end of the season, personally. I think they've just taken this opportunity because throughout the FA Cup. I know, but it's been even longer since.
You've waited so many years, wait 2 months.
That's fair.
Yeah. I just wonder whether they thought, well, this is a weekend, this is sort of a chance to do it, it'd be better than a Monday. They've made a bit of a mess of it generally. To be fair, I follow a few Newcastle fans and they've been saying, making a priority for season ticket holders. It's a dry event, stuff like that. And now they've added a bit of a parade to it before you sort of get there.
Great example of football clubs not being that big as things, isn't it, in terms of levels of organisation, and then having to do things that they don't know how to do.
Yeah,
I would think it's fine.
Yeah,
it's just
so it's all sort of ended up a bit of a mess. But I think what would be interesting is how they come out of it, and I think that was going to be interesting, parade or not, because we've seen in the past, when a big things happen to a club who maybe aren't as sort of used to it, then the seasons can sort of drift out. We've won something now, but Champions League's massive for them. Not just for the fact that they were in it a couple of years ago, getting back in there would be seen as a huge thing in terms of keeping all the players. I think it's absolutely huge. I think if they don't get it, then they lose the centre forward. They might get in and lose him anyway, but I think, you're in a much better position to convince him to stay and drive a really hard bargain for anyone. And so, and he's not the only one who be maybe looking to maybe be one or two others as well. And so I think Champions League's huge for them. It's whether, there'll be the determination amongst the clubs to keep them focused on it. It's just whether they can sort of do that, when it's after the Lord Mayor's parade.
I mean, yeah, so that tracks. It's fine. I mean, I still like the idea of the fact that they think it's going to be a drive in Newcastle. Yeah. I think we've all been there enough times to know that that's really.
Oh yes, people have been sticking all sorts in.
That's absolutely not going to happen. But obviously, the rest of the season so much of the season does hinge upon them getting into the Champions League. In terms of their fixtures, they have some tough ones. They've got some do you think it would be quite easy. Obviously, they've got Arsenal away, but then they've handled Arsenal quite easily so far this season. They've got Chelsea at home, they've got Manchester United at home, they've got Villa away, they've got Brighton away. So you get into that mid-April onwards period, and there's quite a tough run for them. But the ironic thing is that if you look at their results this season, the toughest games they've had have been home games that they expected to win. They've lost at home to Brighton, to Fulham, to Bournemouth, to West Ham. And then the next game they've got after this parade is Brentford. And Brentford are very unpredictable. And they didn't just beat Newcastle early in the season. They absolutely hammered them. It was only 4-2, but it could have been 5 or 6. So this is a bit of a trap for them. We've spoken about Leicester many times, and yes, that is almost an automatic 3 points for them straight afterwards. But they need to come back from this high, and if they come back down to earth with a massive bump, that can really affect maybe. I don't want to say that the players will start thinking about the future this early, but in terms of confidence, it can really be a big hump if they get beaten straight away.
Yeah, it'd be a massive blow to them if they don't beat Brentford. But you've got to look at the first 3 games they've got and think they should be aiming for 9 points from those 3 games. Brentford, there's Leicester away, and there's Manchester United at home. It's Manchester United at home off the back of a European game as well. So it's
true.
How motivated are Manchester United? They're in a really good position where I know that pretty much everyone controls their own destiny in this level, but they feel like the team who's probably, for me, more capable than anybody of putting the run together, just simply because you can see how for 6 weeks Isaac just runs hot and he sorts that. And I'm not necessarily saying they get to 3rd or 4th, but 5th should very, very be well within their sights. And even then, you look at there's 2 key games they've got, I think, towards the end, and they've got Villa away and Brighton away.
Yeah.
Now, and Chelsea at home as well, actually. So if they're the 3 games where it'll be determined. If they fail to win any of those games, it would be really difficult to see how they do get one of those places. But if they are successful in them, which I suspect they might be, you'd have to fancy them, I think.
Yeah, they are still going to be one of the favourites.
You
I
look
think
at that midfield, for example, it's just better than any midfield that anybody else has put.
Yeah.
55.3% chance of making the top 5 according to the Opta supercomputer, which feels like they were one of, I think it's the second favourites after Man City, even ahead of Chelsea, actually.
Yes, because of that game in hand.
Yeah, because of the game in hand. But then there are so many teams snapping at the heels, and we will come on to that in the next part of this show. Let's try to make ourselves as Liverpool fans feel a bit better. Let's look at the scenario where they don't get in. How much of that cup final win do you think plays into the minds of some of the players? Because we've spoken about the fact that they're going to be heroes, they're going to be legends. They were always going to be able to come back to that club and be celebrated because they were the ones who ended the drought. They've made their mark at Newcastle United. Does that not feel like a good time for them to maybe start thinking about moving on?
Well, that's how they'll feel, won't they? And that's sort of the argument that they'll make. I think it just depends on what, options they've got sort of available to them. And I mean, the main fella's Isaac, isn't it? He's the one sort of everyone wants. You're looking at north of 100 million if you want to sort of take him, I think. And I think clubs will be willing to pay that. Newcastle might see that madly is not the worst thing in the world if that sort of happens, because they've had some sort of PRS issues, so that gives a big chunk of change there that allows you to really strengthen. And also sometimes if you sell one, you're able to shut the door and you're able to say to the others, listen, he's gone, there's no more this summer, I don't care what you sort of want to do, you're under contract and it's not happening. And so I think it allows them to sort of do that. And if you're going to do that one, then the most expensive one I think can sometimes make more sense. Listen, he's the hardest to replace. He's a fantastic talent, and there's not loads of brilliant number 9s about, and that's one of the reasons why he is in such a demand. But I think, listen, they want to grow from a position of strength, but they've found that difficult with the PRS things. And yes, they'll be back in the Champions League, but that money doesn't necessarily kick in, and then there's obviously extra rules that come from sort of being in Europe, really. So I don't think the worst thing for them is that the team's broken up. That's the worst thing, isn't it? Because suddenly, you can have fun with Dan Burn and stuff like that, and the story's sort of fantastic. But those stories happen because you've got Bruno, and you've got you've got these players who are properly elite and not just having a nice time.
Absolutely.
I think for me, it's quite obvious that squad needs bulking out quite a lot, and the Isaac thing feels very Coutinho for me in terms of the amount of
what he's
money
able
they
to
get
do,
from him, and then what you're able to demonstrate by you can probably sign 3, 45, 50 million pound players and then say to Bruno and Tonali, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're helping you out, and this is how we're kicking on next forward. And it just feels like it would make a lot of sense to be.
And if you look back to their last Champions League campaign, it was the lack of depth that really did kill them.
Yeah, and the group was so tough.
Yeah. Come on, Alex. You know you was. Okay, so for the end of the show, we decided to do something a little bit different because, as I mentioned, there are so many teams who are fighting it out for European places. There's what? Between 4th place Chelsea and 10th place Bournemouth, there are only 5 points. So I've decided to throw it open to my panel of guests here as to who they think should be the 6th team that we talk about on this show. And John, I'll start with you because I already know what you're going to say.
Yeah, I went for Brighton. They've got the most points, so they're most points on the board. It was interesting, to your FA Cup point before, I was like, see who's only got the league to play for. It's none of them. Brighton, Fulham, Villa, Bournemouth are all in the FA Cup, and Villa are in the Champions League. And I think it's the 3 competitions that the Villa will sort of struggle with. I think there'll be a lot of energy going into the next game. A lot, tie, which is quite rightly, it's what's the biggest game for Aston Villa since they were last in cup finals, so it's absolutely huge. And so I think the emotions around that and will take a little bit off the sort of the league campaign a little bit, really. And so I think it's, if you're asking me who's most likely to finish top 6, I think I've gone for the team with the most points on the board, which is Brighton, and the form team as well.
That's fair. They are coming back into form. It's been a bit of an odd up and down season for them. I think they had some growing pains kind of getting used to Fabian Hertzler and some of his methods, and they are also getting used to the idea of being a team with a bit more pressure, because I mean, you spend £194 million in one transfer window as a team like Brighton, suddenly people start looking at you differently. Suddenly it's not like, well, maybe they can. It's more like, well, they absolutely have to. And it looks like they've put themselves in a position to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. They do look really good. They've kicked on a level over the last couple of months, I think, and they're in a really good position. I think the big game is next midweek. They play Aston Villa next midweek, and I feel like that is it's a key game for them, because if they win that, they put distance between Aston Villa, who I think are probably their biggest dangers. I think I'd probably agree with John that Brighton, because they're not in the Champions League, they are the most likely. I think Villa, if they'd have gone out of Europe in the last round or whatever, they would be more likely. But they have had real problems this season following up European games with a league win, and they're going to not be able, they're going to have two following, at least two.
Yes.
That's going to be games that are really hard for them, and it might be that they drop 4 points, 6 points, whatever in those games. If they do that, it's going to be a long way back. Whereas if Brighton win that game, they put distance. They also have that bracket for Villa to drop points in, and that just feels like where this is decided, and it's a home game for Brighton as well. They struggled last year, like Villa have this year, with the two games a week, and Newcastle last season, as we just mentioned.
Yeah,
now they haven't got that. They've basically got a maximum of 3 midweek games the rest of the season, but that would involve them getting to the FA Cup final, which I'm sure they'd be delighted with.
Yeah.
So I agree with John. I think Brighton are probably the most likely, but on a technicality of the packed nature of Villa's April.
Yeah, I think the thing that I find fascinating for Brighton is you look at their next 3 games.
Yeah.
They've got the quarter-final against Forest, who, as we should remember, beat them 7-0 not that long ago. Then you've got that game against Villa, which is massive, and a 6-pointer as you're going to get at this stage of this season anyway. And then after that, it's a small matter of them going to Crystal Palace. And let's not forget that Palace beat them at home earlier this season. So as much as people can say, well, I don't understand why they hate each other. They hate each other.
Yeah,
get over it. Deal with it. And this game is going to be massive. So you look at that, and then obviously they've got the gimme of Leicester straight after. If they can maybe win all 3 of those games, then that means that when it gets to that tougher point later on in the season, John, they may well have already been able to deal with most of what they need to deal with. And they can go into those games and maybe feel like we can maybe do it all. We can maybe get to the FA Cup final and get into Europe.
Yeah, I mean, fixtures are the really interesting thing at this time of year, aren't they? Because, we can look at the fixtures for every team between now and the end of the season, but you don't know what a team's going to have to play for, by mid-May. Phil mentioned before a Fulham game sort of late in the season. Are they going for it, or have they drifted out? And it's hard to tell, really. But what we do know is that's a real big week, sort of coming up, and you're able to assess it there and thinking, well, Villa shouldn't have Champions League distractions on that Wednesday. For example, and so I think that is a real big week for them, really. And sometimes, when it is as tight as what you describe, Mo, sometimes it is as simple as whose fixtures are landing where, and are you sort of getting a little bit lucky with when you're playing teams? Yeah. Not even who, it can be when.
Just looking at Brighton's last 3 there, and in terms of games falling at the right time, they could genuinely be 3 unbelievable ones. Wolves away. What are Wolves away playing forward 3? Wolves playing forward 3 games to go. You've got a Liverpool team who could theoretically have the title wrapped up, and then you've got Tottenham away. What are Tottenham playing for? The most Tottenham are playing for on the last day of the season is Europa League final in 3 days.
Yeah.
And they're not taking that serious.
No.
So that is about as nice as you could have circumstances you asked for.
Yeah, no, I concur. I'm slightly disappointed that no one went for Bournemouth, but I mean, again, looking at their fixtures, it's enough.
It feels like the race is run a bit for me.
Yeah.
It feels like the race is run a little bit.
I've got to go past a lot of teams.
I wish that a season like they've had would be rewarded with European football, and I fear that the vultures will circle once they don't get there. Speaking of vultures, I can see a few over my head right now, just telling me that it's time to wrap up this show. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, John. Thank you, all of you, for watching. We'll see you next season.